Hello, everyone. Welcome to Curated Tour number 2. I am Dr. Georgiana Stanciu, Curator at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum. And I am here today for the second Curated Tour this year. And I would say by popular demand, we have chosen to discuss a Second World War topic. And it is timely enough to go over Operation Gold Flake and Liberation of Holland. Before we move on to our brief presentation, I would like to briefly go over the Zoom etiquette. As you may have already seen, the meeting is recorded, and please keep your video and the microphones muted. Also, before we start, I would like to mention and thank our tech support today, the Museum Collections Registrar, Jessica Stevenson, who is in the background and is taking care of the technical aspects of this presentation. And finally, I am welcoming today a guest with whom I share an interest for the forgotten operations of major world conflicts. And my guest is Dr. Brad St. Croix, who worked with the museum previously. And before he will talk to you about Operation Gold Flake and the liberation of Holland, I will ask him to briefly present himself. Finally, and I will take a break after this. If you have any questions at any time, please put them in the chat box, and our tech support, Jessica, will pass them on. Thank you very much. It's up to you, Brad, please.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, Georgiana. I really appreciate it. Like I've said in the past, big fan of the museum, so always happy to contribute in some way and help get the word of the museum out there. So, as Georgiana just said, my name is Brad St. Croix. I got my PhD from the University of Ottawa fairly recently. I focused on the Battle of Hong Kong for my dissertation. I do all kinds of different history projects, mostly in the digital spaces as of now, like stuff like this, but I do my own kind of thing as well. So it's great to be able to do something with an organization that I really, really respect and admire, and a unit that I've known a ton about growing up in London myself. So it's, again, great to be on here and great to do this. So like I said, or like Georgiana said, we'll be talking about Operation Gold Flake. So I'm going to start with some real brief background, talk about the operation itself, and just some real quick conclusions about it. Because like Georgiana said, there's lots out there that's not discussed as much as it should be. And I think this is one of them, because it's a major operation that's pulled off very, very well. And that's kind of forgotten in all of the narratives about this. So just some quick background. So the 1st Canadian Division, which included the Royal Canadian Regiment, and the 1st Canadian Armour Brigade, were originally sent to Britain and part of the 1st Canadian Army that was established there on the ongoing parts of the Second World War. As many of you do know, that they fought in Sicily starting in the summer of 1943 and beginning Canada's involvement in the Italian campaign. The units had been sent to be part of the invasion due to the want of the Canadian government to get certain Canadian formations into battle to see how to increase the effectiveness of the Canadian Army, but also to literally get some battle experience, as Canadian Army units had none up until this point, other than what had happened at Hong Kong and at Dieppe. So as the war continued on, the 1st Canadian Division fought alongside, like I said, the Armour Brigade. The 5th Canadian Armour Division was added in early 1944, thus bringing up the Canadian contribution to the corps level in Italy. As this was ongoing, though, there was always a want within the Canadian government to have all Canadian units reunited under 1st Canadian Army at some point, whenever that might have been feasible. So that's something important to keep in mind when thinking about the Italian campaign and what we're talking about today. So in the official history of the Canadian Army, and I thought this was really an interesting sentence that was included, it had become a matter of national policy that the separation of the Canadian forces should be ended as soon as a reunion could be justified on military grounds. I thought that was a really interesting comment to be included in the official history of the war from the Canadian Army, saying that this was something that the Canadian government really, really wanted. Also, it wasn't just a Canadian want. The Allied Higher Command wanted to take as many divisions basically as they could from Italy to Northwest Europe. And it all kind of came together as one Canadian division. The 5th Armored was already out of the line and in reserve at the time. Canadian units became to be kind of the natural choice to kind of fit both of these wants. And therefore, the 1st Canadian Corps was chosen for this move. But they were also joined by the 5th British Infantry Division for the move from Italy to Northwest Europe that was known as Operation Gold Flake. Mm-hmm. So it was done in many distinct phases, down usually by the formation and the divisional level. The first ones to actually move were the assorted troops and headquarters staff that were attached to one Canadian Corps. They were the first to go. They had been based in Ravenna, and then they started to move on February 13th for Naples. That was their main debarkation point. First group of these left on February 22nd for Marseille, and then they moved through the Rhone Valley and France up to Belgium to set up the headquarters for one Canadian Corps. The 5th Armored Division was the next to go. They deported through Leghorn beginning on the 15th of February. On the 27th of the same month, the first troops of divisions reached Belgium, which is quite amazing. On the last day of February, the division re-entered the line south of Arnhem. And once the advance began on the front of the 1st Canadian Army, the division was using a rapid drive north to seal off the Western Netherlands and isolate the German forces still in the area. For this division alone, it's approximated that there was 20,000 troops, 5,600 wheel vehicles, 450 tanks, and 320 carriers from this division alone was moved from Italy to the Netherlands, which is just a massive amount of material and equipment. So also the 1st Canadian Armored Brigade, which was an independent brigade throughout the entire war, had been dispersed throughout Italy as it fought in the Italian campaign. And it wasn't exclusively supporting Canadian units. It had been supporting British and particularly Indian units who they formed a very close bond with. Despite this dispersion, they came together very quickly and very effectively. They also went through Leghorn, and it was completed by the 8th of March. And a week later, they were in Belgium. So within a month of breaking off the fighting and direct fighting against German forces in Italy, the brigade was committed to fighting again in support of the British 49th Division on the Nijmegen Island, as it's called, in operations against the Germans. So that's a very quick turnaround for an operation like this. The division, the last major unit to leave was the 1st Canadian Division, which of course includes the Royal Canadian Regiment and the 1st Canadian Infantry Brigade. They were the final one to leave. They were again on the front lines along the Senio River, and they were relieved by the 8th Indian Division on the 23rd of February. And it was the 3rd Brigade of that division that was the last Canadian unit in Italy that was on the front lines. And it was relieved by the 19th Indian Brigade on the 27th of February. And their embarkation began at Leghorn on the 7th of March. Of all the Canadian formations that were to come from Italy, the 1st Canadian Division was the only one to see actual service on German soil. That was only for 3 days. As it was on April 3rd, it was concentrated in the Reichswald forest temporarily, which is interesting, becoming part of 2nd Canadian Corps. But again, it was a very short period. And then it moved north into the Netherlands at Zutphen to storm across the Issel River on the 11th of April. And then on the 13th, it was back under command of the 1st Canadian Corps for the clearing of the Western Netherlands. So for the rest, they followed after that. Any troops that were left from the 1st Canadian Corps were sent on their own to join the rest of their compatriots. So by the end of March, and these stats come from the official history, there had been 3,534 officers moved, alongside 54,638 men were transferred to Northwest Europe from Italy. So this impressive move of troops and material was partially completed by the #1 Special Vehicle Company of the Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps. This organization was literally created out of numerous ad hoc units for Operation Gold Flake. They had moved 4,500 vehicles, a total distance of more than 2.5 miles, but only suffered 28 road collisions and accidents. I mean, that's a pretty impressive number for something like this. The naval elements also of this were obviously critical, coming from Naples and Leghorn to Marseille in the south of France. One ship took 600 tons of stores, mostly Canadian uniforms, which arrived too late. So they directly took them from Naples and round all the way to Antwerp. So again, that's just one example of all these things that were removed. But also there was tons of other things left, like office supplies, canteen supplies, surplus kit, and all of that also had to be moved from Italy to the United Kingdom. Also, in terms of how Gold Flake went about, it had to be kept secret, obviously, right? Moving a large number of troops could cause problems for the Allied line in Italy, so they had to keep this quiet. And it was done very, very well. It was largely successful because captured German documents that they had access to later on did not show Canadian troops gone until April 19th, when they were all very much gone, and even into Belgium by this point, some of them. So that is showing really the deception efforts really affected German intelligence on the front lines in Italy. And also there was very little to know. There was one incident of some minesweepers running into each other, but they don't, it was an accident. They don't think that there was any interference with the convoys due to German intelligence understanding what was happening. It was just more one of her happenstance. And just real quick in conclusion, Operation Gold Flake allowed the 1st Canadian Army, which for most of its existence, the Canadian units actually were the minority, to become a fully true Canadian Army unit. It was the first time in years that could be said, but now it was going into combat altogether for really the first time in the Second World War.
Yes, thank you, Brad. Indeed, I would like to echo your brief overview of Operation Gold Flake with some reading I did in the regimental war diary, and this feeling of convoys moving around and the efficiency of these convoys clearly transpires at all times. So now I am going to turn the camera and go over the few artifacts that we have in this small section dedicated to Operation Gold Flake, Liberation of Holland. I would like to say that Liberation of Holland is not a mistake. I am employing this terminology because it is the terminology that can be found in the period documentation, including the war diary. So let's begin with a few images over here. First of all, after arriving in Belgium and they are in Holland in May 1945. People from serving members from the RCR are participating in the disarming of the German troops. I will come back to that later. And because they disarmed the German troops, I'm going to show you this image very closely. It is, we do have a copy of it, but the current image is from Library and Archives Canada. And take a look at these weapons, because some of them are similar to what we display in our collection. So this machine gun, and we have the opportunity to see it very close today. Oops, over here. I was looking for the serial numbers, which I can't seem to find at the moment. But this is the sight, the scope sort of thing. And the pistol, automatic pistol, and the carabiner rifle. So in terms of items related to this time of the at this time in the war, we have here a very interesting medal collection, if you wish. I hesitate to call it medal set. It's a member of the Dutch resistance, and actually these medals were donated by a family member of Mr. de Graaf, who was in the Dutch resistance, and he earned these medals. Also, the armband that was worn by the Dutch resistance. And another interesting item, as you can see over here, is the safe pass for members of the German army. They have this safe pass, and they are disarmed, and they can move on to their business. The clogs that you see here were offered to one of the ORs of the Canadian Fusiliers, who eventually made the trip to Holland and was part of the Canadian, the small formation from Canadian Fusiliers who participated in the liberation of Holland. And of course, in spring 1945, and this is a photograph from our collection, this image of Montgomery, Brigadier General Spry and General Curator in spring 1945 in Holland. Also, by the end of, 17 April or so, the famous parade of bugles on the streets of Apeldoorn. At the time of the liberation of Holland, the Holland population had not been only occupied, but also deprived of food. And the documents speak about the starvation in Holland at length. I am going to move on right now to a little treat that I prepared for today's curated tour, and that is the war diary. It is difficult to read the war diary as we are doing this short, brief tour, but just to give you an idea of what the interest is at the time. So the Royal Canadian Regiment is at Harrod's Camp near Livorno in Italy between 2nd and 7th of March. They embark on ship on the 8th and 9th of March, and they are in France on the 10th of March. So this speaks to the efficiency that Brad mentioned earlier. And once they get to France, everything moves very smoothly and very quickly. Interesting to note, a party of officers decides to visit, as they move on through northern France, decide to visit the Vimy battlefield and eventually organize a ceremony. It's timely, soon will be 9 April. And in the end, it doesn't happen due to operational needs. But once they get to Belgium, they also visit the Waterloo battlefield. So before the sweep to Apeldoorn, everything seems relatively calm, while when what they call Operation Keystone begins, which is an air observation and jeep operation in central Netherlands in April 1945, to which RCR contributed, then this is going very different. And there are casualties, there are many prisoners of wars captured, and quite a bit of confrontation. Eventually, and here we are on the 1st of April, when things start to pick up, so to speak. There are officers who are sent on leave at that time. There is a lot of training happening. And even General Curator comes to talk to the troops, encouraging them for Operation CANNONSHOT that liberated Apeldoorn. Thank you for being with us today. We will continue our curated tours, and Brad is my guest for the year. So I think then our next curated tour is the Battle of Mount Sorel in June. We have discussed maybe we'll do something in May, but that is not likely. Anyways, in June, another little known battle that has a very important significance for Canadian military history. And that is from the First World War at Mount Sorel, again in Belgium, June 1916. Thank you very much, everyone. And we hope to see you at the next curated tour.
Thank you.